A wolf finds a baby in a car accident, takes it into the forest, and what it does next will leave you in shock. It was a stormy night, one of those where the rain seems endless. The road cutting through the forest was wet and slippery. In the car, a young couple was driving home after visiting family. The sound of the windshield wipers struggled against the raindrops, blurring their view. In the back seat, a baby just a few months old slept peacefully, unaware of the storm and the world around. Suddenly, everything happened in an instant. An animal darted across the road, and as the driver swerved, they lost control of the car. The vehicle skidded across the road, slid down the embankment, and rolled over, coming to rest in a ravine. The sound was terrifying, the screech of crumpling metal and shattering glass. Then, silence, except for the baby's cries, awakened by the crash. Inside the car, the couple lay motionless, trapped and unconscious, while the baby, strapped in the car seat, cried desperately. The overturned car was hidden by dense vegetation, out of sight from anyone passing by the road. The rain kept pouring, making the night colder and darker. At that moment, it seemed as though no one would find them. But the forest never sleeps. Not far from there, a grey wolf, the alpha of its pack, was hunting. It was large, powerful, with eyes that gleamed even in the darkness. It moved silently, like a ghost among the trees. Then something caught its attention. The wolf lifted its head, sniffing the air. It wasn't the scent of prey, it was something different. Following its instinct, the wolf grew curious. As it approached, it heard the sound, a faint, continuous cry. The wolf stood still for a few seconds, as if trying to understand what it was. When it reached the overturned car, the wolf saw the baby. Small, fragile, with tears streaming down its face. The wolf came closer cautiously, as though sensing the vulnerability of the little creature. It circled the vehicle, sniffing the scent of gasoline and metal, but it was the sound of the cries that drew it in. The baby stretched out its tiny arms as if asking for help, and the wolf, usually driven solely by survival instincts, did something extraordinary. Slowly, it pushed its nose through a gap in the broken window. It didn't attack or growl. On the contrary, it seemed protective. Carefully, the wolf pulled the baby out, holding it delicately with its teeth in a way that seemed impossible for such a wild animal. It was as if the wolf understood that this tiny life depended on it. Without hesitation, the wolf carried the baby in its mouth, leaving the accident scene behind. That night, fate performed an incredible act, uniting two worlds that were never meant to meet but somehow needed each other. When the alpha wolf reached the clearing where its pack gathered, it carried something completely foreign to them, a human baby. The other wolves, seeing the alpha approach with the strange little being in its jaws, grew tense. Some growled, while others stayed back, wary. After all, this was not something common in their world. However, the alpha gently placed the baby on the ground, as if showing that it posed no threat. The baby's crying had quieted, though it still whimpered, frightened and cold. The alpha stepped back, observing the pack. Its posture was clear. This was now their responsibility. It would not allow anyone to harm the baby. Surprisingly, one of the older female wolves approached first. She sniffed the baby and, after a moment, lay down beside it, offering warmth. The other wolves watched from a distance, torn between curiosity and caution. Gradually, the pack began to understand that if the alpha accepted this small being, they, too, must accept it. The first days were difficult. The baby, used to the comfort of home and the arms of its parents, was now surrounded by wolves, howling at night and living on cold ground. It cried often, and the alpha was always nearby, watching over and keeping any threats at bay. The female wolves instinctively began to care for the baby as if it were one of their pups. They kept it warm, and the alpha brought small pieces of meat, as it did for the pack's cubs. Though unsure of exactly what to do, it was as if they understood that this life needed to be protected. Meanwhile, in the city, search teams were in full swing. Helicopters flew over the forest, and rescue groups scoured the roadside. But no one imagined the baby was so close, being cared for by a wolf pack. The most astonishing thing happened over time. The baby began to adapt. It stopped crying as much, as if realizing it was safe. Sometimes, it would reach out its tiny hands, trying to touch the wolves that came close. Amazingly, they let it. The female wolves treated it as one of their own, grooming it with their tongues and keeping it close to the group for warmth. The alpha, always vigilant, patrolled the area to ensure no predators approached. It was an improbable sight, a human baby being protected by a family of wild wolves. Meanwhile, the forest seemed to guard its secret. Every sound, every rustle of the trees, seemed to conspire to keep the baby hidden, as if nature itself was collaborating to give it a chance to survive. In that moment, a silent bond began to form between the baby and the wolves. It wasn't just an unusual guest, it was becoming part of the pack. Before we continue, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their emotional stories. Jack was known in town as someone who understood the forest like no one else. He wasn't just a hunter, he was a man who respected nature and knew how to read every sign it gave. Cracks in branches, footprints in the mud, the song of birds, everything told him a story. So when he heard about the accident and the missing baby, he felt compelled to help. While teams with advanced technology entered and left the forest with no results, Jack relied on his own methods. He knew the forest had its secrets and often revealed them only to those who truly understood it. He packed his backpack, put on his worn hat, and set off at dawn, determined to find something everyone else had overlooked. Arriving at the crash site, Jack examined the wrecked car. He noticed something no one else had: paw prints in the mud near the vehicle. They were large and heavy. Wolf, he thought, narrowing his eyes. He followed the tracks leading deeper into the forest. Every step made him feel he was on the right path, but it also increased his worry. He knew wolves rarely approached humans, but if a baby had crossed paths with a pack, the outcome might not be good. Yet something about the tracks intrigued him. There were no signs of a struggle or dragging. It was as if the wolf had carried something gently. Jack decided not to jump to conclusions, but his heart was torn between hope and fear. As he ventured further into the forest, Jack came across markings on the ground showing that the wolf had stopped several times, perhaps to rest or survey its surroundings. This reinforced the idea that it was carrying something, and Jack could only think of the missing baby. During his trek, Jack spotted signs of other animals. A bear had passed through recently, and he knew that if the wolf had the baby, it would have to protect it from predators like that. This only heightened the urgency of his search. Despite the challenges, Jack pressed on. He knew the forest could be cruel, but it could also surprise. He recalled stories he'd heard of wolves caring for the young of other species. Maybe, just maybe, the baby was still alive. After hours of tracking, Jack stopped. He had reached a clearing and saw something that left him speechless. Amidst a trail of crushed leaves was a small piece of fabric, dirty but clearly part of a baby's clothing. He picked it up carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Now Jack was certain the wolves were involved, but not in the way most people would think. They didn't attack him, he thought. They took him somewhere. With this renewed certainty, Jack adjusted his backpack, looked up at the darkening sky, and pressed on. He knew the search would be long, but he was more determined than ever to uncover what had really happened to that baby. With every step, Jack felt he was getting closer, not just to the baby but to a truth no one else could see. The forest held a secret, and he was about to uncover it. Meanwhile, back in town, as Jack followed his instincts in the forest, the baby's family was living a nightmare. The parents, who had survived the crash but were hospitalized, were still in shock. The mother, tears streaming down her face, kept asking everyone who entered the room, "Have you found my baby? Is he okay? Please tell me he's okay." The doctors tried to calm her, but nothing could ease her anguish. The father, with his arm in a cast and cuts on his face, sat silently, eyes fixed on the floor, as if consumed by guilt. He kept repeating to himself, "It was my responsibility. I should have protected him." Meanwhile, other family members gathered at the police station, demanding answers. The baby's grandmother, holding a photo of him in her hands, pleaded with the officers. "He's only 6 months old. How can no one find him? He can't have gone far." The investigators, despite all efforts, had no concrete leads. Helicopters flew over the area, search dogs covered miles of trails, and volunteers from the town scoured the forest's perimeter. Still, there was no sign of the baby. At the family's home, the despair was even more palpable. The empty crib felt like an open wound. The toys sat untouched, as if waiting for the baby to return and play with them again. Neighbors came by to offer support, bringing food and words of comfort, but nothing could fill the void. "He's so small, so helpless," an aunt said, hugging the grandmother. Where could he be? Time seemed to drag on. Every minute without news was another weight on the family's hearts. They clung to any shred of hope, no matter how small. One of the aunts, clutching the phone, called the rescue teams incessantly, asking if there were any updates. "You need to do more," she said, her voice breaking. "Don't stop looking." That night, as darkness enveloped the town, the baby's mother, still in the hospital, clasped her hands and began to pray. Her voice was soft but full of emotion. "God, wherever he is, please watch over him. Protect my baby, I beg you." Meanwhile, far away in the forest, the baby was safe in nature's arms, under the unlikely care of a wolf who seemed to have answered that prayer. The alpha wolf was different. He wasn't just the leader of the pack, he was a natural protector. From the moment he pulled the baby from the car, it was as if he knew that tiny creature needed him. It wasn't just instinct, it was something deeper, something even the other wolves couldn't comprehend. In the clearing, as the baby whimpered softly, the wolf stayed by its side. He used his body to shield the child from the cold wind and occasionally sniffed it to ensure it was okay. The baby's eyes, still wet with tears, began to focus on the imposing figure of the wolf. There was no fear, only curiosity, as if the baby sensed it was safe. Even without fully understanding what this small being was, the alpha wolf seemed to have made a decision. He would protect it at all costs. That night, he positioned himself at the entrance to the pack's den, his eyes alert and ears attuned to every sound. Anything that threatened the baby would have to go through him first. In the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. The wolf began treating the baby like one of his own pups. He brought small chewed pieces of meat and placed them near the baby. Of course, the baby couldn't eat it, but the wolf's effort revealed his instinct to nurture. The pack's female wolves also started approaching. One of them, older and more experienced, stayed close to the baby, using her body heat to keep it warm. Another gently licked the child's face, as she did with the pack's pups, trying to clean it. Gradually, the human baby became part of the group. The alpha wolf, however, never let his guard down. He knew the forest was dangerous. During the day, he patrolled the area, sniffing and marking territory. At night, he positioned himself near the baby, a barrier against any threat. The most remarkable thing was the bond that began to form between the baby and the wolf. The baby, who had initially cried constantly, now seemed calmer. Whenever the wolf was nearby, the baby reached out its tiny hands, trying to touch the thick, grey fur. And the wolf allowed it. In a striking moment, the baby started making small sounds, almost as if trying to communicate with the wolf. He laughed when the alpha tilted his head or twitched his ears. It was an improbable scene, a human baby and a wild wolf sharing a connection that seemed impossible. Even in the cold, perilous forest, the baby was protected, not just by the wolf's strength but by the unexpected affection it had found there. It was something no scientific explanation could fully describe. It was as if the wolf and the baby had found in each other exactly what they needed. The alpha wolf was not just a protector. He was becoming a father figure to the baby. Somehow, he understood that this tiny being was fragile and needed special care. The pack followed the alpha's lead, accepting the baby as part of their group, but the strongest bond was undeniably between the alpha and the child. Every gesture, every look between them, showed that something much greater was happening. It wasn't just about survival. It was a connection that defied all logic but somehow made perfect sense in that moment. Nature had crossed two entirely different worlds to create a unique and extraordinary bond. As the baby adapted to the pack and its bond with the alpha wolf grew stronger, danger loomed. In town, rumors about wolves began to circulate. Some believed the wolves were responsible for the baby's disappearance. Others, driven by fear and prejudice, decided to take matters into their own hands. A group of hunters, armed and determined, organized a search in the forest. Their intentions were far from peaceful. To them, the wolves were monsters that needed to be eliminated. They had no idea that, at that very moment, the wolves were protecting the baby as one of their own. Jack, who was also in the forest, learned of the hunters' plans and grew concerned. He knew wolves better than anyone and understood that, though wild, they wouldn't attack without reason. He also suspected the wolves were involved in the disappearance, but in a different way, protecting, not harming. Jack encountered the hunters deep in the forest. They were near the tracks he had been following. Their weapons were ready, and nervousness was evident on their faces. "You shouldn't be out here like this," Jack said firmly. "Hunting won't solve the problem." "And what do you suggest? That we sit and wait while these wolves destroy everything?" One of the men snapped angrily. Jack took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew arguing wouldn't help, so he changed his approach. "Listen, if the wolves have the baby, attacking won't help. They might be protecting him." The hunters laughed, incredulous. "Wolves protecting a baby? That's absurd, Jack. You're delusional." But Jack didn't give up. He knew he had to prevent a direct confrontation between the hunters and the wolves. The baby's life depended on it. The hunters ignored Jack's warnings and kept moving forward. After several hours, they arrived at a clearing where they finally found the wolf pack. The wolves were gathered in a circle, with the alpha at the front, protecting the baby who was lying in an improvised nest of leaves. Seeing the scene, the hunters hesitated, stunned. The baby was alive, appeared well, and clearly hadn't been harmed. But the tension escalated quickly when one of the hunters raised his gun. "Don't do it!" Jack shouted, stepping between the men and the wolves. "Look! They didn't hurt the baby. They are taking care of him." The alpha growled softly, not attacking, but making it clear that he would protect the baby at all costs. The other wolves followed suit, forming a barrier around the child. "Do you really want to shoot animals that are protecting a life?" Jack continued, looking directly at the leader of the hunters. "Think about what you're doing. This isn't just about fear or prejudice. It's about something bigger." As the tension filled the air, something extraordinary happened. The baby began to cry, and the alpha wolf, without taking his eyes off the hunters, lowered his head to gently nudge the baby with his nose, trying to calm him. The scene melted even the hardest of hearts. One of the hunters lowered his gun, murmuring, "It can't be. He's really protecting the baby." Jack seized the moment and moved forward slowly. He knew he had to earn the alpha's trust to safely retrieve the baby. "I won't hurt him, I promise," Jack said, his voice calm and steady. The alpha watched him but didn't growl. It was as if he understood Jack's sincerity. When Jack got close enough, the wolf took a step back, allowing him to pick up the baby in his arms. With the baby secure, Jack backed away slowly, keeping his eyes on the wolves. He knew this was a rare and precious moment. The hunters, now silent, also retreated. There was no longer any reason to attack. "Did you see what happened here today?" Jack said, looking at the men. "This wasn't just instinct. These wolves protected a life. Think about that before you pick up a gun again." The hunters were silent, some ashamed, others confused. They had learned a lesson they would never forget. As Jack carried the baby back to town, he looked over his shoulder and saw the alpha wolf watching from a distance, as if ensuring everything was all right. In that moment, Jack felt something extraordinary had occurred, a connection between man, nature, and something greater, something that defied any explanation. When Jack arrived in town with the baby in his arms, the buzz began before he even reached the main square. People on the street stopped what they were doing and followed his steps, trying to understand what was happening. The baby's mother, still fragile in the hospital, was notified immediately, and the news spread like wildfire. The baby was alive. At the hospital, Jack handed the baby over to his mother's arms, and she immediately began crying with relief. The father, still trying to process the moment, stood beside her, touching his son's face as if needing to confirm it was real. "How did he survive?" someone asked, but Jack's answer left everyone speechless. "It was a pack of wolves. They protected him." A murmur of astonishment filled the room. Wolves? Protecting a baby? It was hard to believe. Many thought Jack was exaggerating or making it up, but he remained calm, explaining everything he had seen. He described how the alpha protected the baby, how the pack cared for him as if he were one of their own. Each detail left the people more incredulous and emotional. Soon, the story grew even bigger. Regional journalists arrived to cover the case. Photos of the baby in his mother's arms made headlines like, "Forest Miracle. Baby survives with the help of wolves." Social media buzzed with theories, debates, and even criticism. While some hailed the wolves as heroes, others doubted the story's plausibility. In the town square, neighbors gathered, discussing the event. Some said it was a sign, something almost divine. Others, more skeptical, questioned if it was true. But one thing no one could deny: the baby was alive, and that alone was a miracle. The family, now reunited, tried to recover from the trauma, but they couldn't hide their gratitude for Jack and, unexpectedly, for the wolves. "They saved our son," the mother said emotionally. "I'll never forget this." While the town debated, Jack knew what he had witnessed was more than just an act of survival. He had seen the impossible, a bond between the wild and the human. And now, that story would become part of the town's collective memory, something to be told and retold for generations, carrying a lesson of respect and connection with nature. And somewhere in the forest, the alpha wolf watched the horizon, as if he knew his mission was complete. After the baby's return to his family, local researchers and environmentalists began to take an interest in the story. It was such an unusual case that no one could ignore it. How could a wolf pack, especially one led by an alpha, act so protectively toward a human? This behavior challenged everything known about these animals. A group of biologists decided to study the pack. Guided by Jack's account of where he found the baby, they set up cameras and began observing the wolves from a distance. The discovery was astonishing. The alpha wolf displayed unique behavior. He wasn't just a leader commanding the group, he was also a protector, caring for all the members with an almost paternal attentiveness. The researchers explained that the alpha played a crucial role in the forest. He not only guided the pack but also influenced the behavior of other animals, maintaining balance between predators and prey. Furthermore, wolves like him were essential for preserving the health of the ecosystem, even helping forests regenerate by controlling overpopulated species. This revelation changed how many locals viewed wolves. Jack, seizing the momentum, decided to organize a town meeting. He knew that many still saw wolves as enemies but believed this story could change even the most resistant minds. At the meeting, Jack began by recounting the rescue, detailing how the alpha wolf had cared for the baby. He brought in researchers to talk about the importance of wolves in maintaining the forest's balance and shared footage captured by the cameras, showing the pack in their natural behavior. "We've been taught to fear wolves," Jack said, looking directly at the townspeople. "But what this story has shown us is that they aren't monsters. They are an essential part of nature and can even surprise us with acts of kindness." The room fell silent. The images and Jack's words resonated with everyone there. Even the most skeptical began to rethink their attitudes. A man who had always participated in hunts raised his hand. "I never thought I'd say this, but I think we need more respect for these animals. If it weren't for them, that baby might not be alive today." Jack smiled, feeling he had planted a seed of change. That day, the town began to see wolves differently. They were no longer viewed solely as dangerous predators but as a vital part of the ecosystem and, in this specific case, as protectors. The story of the alpha wolf and the baby didn't just touch everyone's hearts, it also delivered an important lesson. Nature, as wild as it may seem, can surprise us with acts of care and balance. Jack knew there was still a long road ahead to educate the community, but it was a start. More than ever, he was determined to protect the forest and its inhabitants, both human and wild. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments.